Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, in China's Xinjiang province, clashes between security forces and ethnic Muslim Uighurs have killed more than 100 people in recent months. So what's driving the violence in this remote region? So many questions about the Uyghur community from our online community. Malika Bilal is our digital producer. You've been wrangling all of those questions. What are people asking?
Well, they're coming in from all over the world, Sweden, Nigeria. I want to share this one. We got this one just as the show began, and this kind of sums up what a lot of people online were asking. Ikenem writes, I have always been confused about how the Uyghur people got to be under Chinese rule. I can't wait to hear the facts. So we will hear those facts from today's show, but we want your questions and your comments as well. So tweet us with hashtag AJStream.
So Leem is with us here in the studio, and Leem is the spokesman of the World Uyghur Congress and president of the Uyghur American Association. Leem, it's good to have you back here on the stream.
My great pleasure.
And we look forward to hearing more from you in just a moment.
Of course.
But before we do that, I want to tell you how you can find out a little bit more about this region in China and the Uyghur people. While we're actually doing this show, you can download our brand new app from the stream by going to the link that you see on the bottom of the screen, and you'll find out some extra information and interactive elements about the Xinjiang province and the people who live there.
Hi, I'm Christina Wong. I perform a show called Wong Quiver the Cuckoos Nest, and I am in the stream.
Chinese police shot and killed 6 people last week in Xinjiang province in northwest China. According to a state media report, a man with an axe attacked police officers and tried to set off an explosive device in a business district before being shot. The report added that 5 others attacked police as they tried to dispose of the bomb. They too were killed. In the last 2 years, hundreds of people have been killed in this region because of violence between ethnic minority Han Chinese and the Muslim Uyghur people who call Xinjiang their home. The government says it's dealing with terrorism committed by Uyghur separatists, but the Uyghurs say the unrest is rooted in restrictive policies that discriminate against Uyghurs. So to help us talk about this, we're also joined by Victor Gao, director of the China National Association of International Studies and president of the China Energy Security Institute. And also Anne Henakowitz is a translations editor at the China Digital Times, and that's a bilingual news site focusing on content censored in China. And we also tried to reach the Chinese government through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the embassy right here in Washington DC, but we did not hear back from them. So let's get the conversation started, Leem, with this idea. Our committee really wanted to know more about the Uyghur community. If you explained to them who are the Uyghurs, what would you say?
The Uyghur people are, number one, we're not Chinese. Historically,
You're not Chinese?
No, we're not Chinese. And even if I walk on the streets, the Chinese people will not recognize me as Chinese. When I first came to the US in 1996, my Chinese passport was expiring. So I went to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco to extend my passport. The Chinese official thought I was an American applying for a visa. But as soon as he saw my red Chinese passport, he got very upset for the fact that even Uyghurs could come to the US. So even Chinese people or officials say, do not recognize as Chinese.
Why would you're part of China. So why would Chinese people not recognize you as being Chinese also?
Because we don't look like them. Because in the minds of Chinese, basically Han are the Chinese. The so-called Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Mongols, some others, they are usually considered as barbarians or the so-called minorities under their rule. Because the Uyghurs are the most unique one, and we don't resemble Han or any other people there. So even in the Chinese movies in the past, when they show foreigners, they usually use Uyghur actors because we look more Western than Chinese. So that's why. And also historically, we're not Chinese at all. China is our neighbor. But under 1949, we officially became part of China. And in 1955, China created so-called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which has no autonomy at all. That's why we're seeing current high tension in the region.
All right, so Victor, this is interesting. Victor has Uyghur friends. Are your Uyghur friends Chinese as far as you're concerned, Victor?
Well, if Alim, as he said, holds a Chinese passport, then legally, by definition, Alim is a Chinese citizen. Now, in China, being a Chinese citizen doesn't mean that you have to be a Han Chinese. I'm a Han Chinese, and Alim is a Uyghur Chinese. Now, he's confusing two different concepts. One is Chinese citizen, for example. The other one refers to the subdivision, ethnic groups. In China, we have altogether 56 ethnic groups. Like in the United States, you have hundreds of different ethnic groups from all parts of the world. To be Ukrainian, for example, in America, doesn't mean that you are a Ukrainian citizen. You can be a Ukrainian by ethnic grouping, but you can be a US citizen. So Alim is a Chinese citizen by definition.
Sorry,
by
I'm
law,
not a Chinese citizen. Actually, I'm a US
Uyghur,
citizen.
And I am a Han.
Okay.
Okay, then you forfeited your Chinese citizenship.
Gladly.
Then you are not qualified to talk about Uyghur situation in China.
Who are you to decide?
talk about
Who
Uyghur
are you to
situation in the
decide
United
whether I
States.
could talk about the Uyghur situation? And you, as a Han Chinese, talk about the Uyghur situation? You are qualified because you had a couple of some Uyghur friends, purportedly.
Listen, Uyghurs in Xinjiang are Chinese citizens by definition, and it's recognized throughout the world. If you are a US citizen, you are less qualified to talk about Uyghur situation in Xinjiang.
Why? Because that's what you or your government thinks so? So we cannot talk about the Uyghur people because
gentlemen,
you as a Han Chinese, you can talk about the Uyghur people.
Gentlemen,
I am a Uyghur, cannot talk about it?
Gentlemen, let me just interject. Victor, hold tight. Leem, hold tight. Everybody on this show is extremely qualified. Victor, hold tight for a moment. We're going way off topic here, just for a moment.
Internal affairs.
All right, everybody's qualified to be on this show because we booked them and we have very good bookers. Meanwhile, as we are learning about the Uyghur community, we're hearing a little bit here of the tension. But what else would the community like to know, Malika?
Well, some are picking up on that tension between some Han Chinese and the Uyghurs. So Fazihal on Twitter says, Uyghurs are native to Xinjiang, the Han are not. Uyghurs are Muslims and they're being persecuted, this person writes. But there's a question here, Aleem, that I want to address to you, and this is picking up on that same theme. Adesina says, what is the relationship of Uyghurs with the vast majority of others who are not of their faith in Xinjiang and outside of the province?
The Uyghur people have been living peacefully with different groups. In East Turkestan, we call not Xinjiang. Mr. Gao and the Chinese government would be happy to let the world know it's Xinjiang. Xinjiang in the Chinese language literally means new territory. It has not historically part of China. The Uyghurs have not been historically Chinese, just like Tibetans and Mongols. But Uyghurs lived with other faiths, whether that was Uyghurs historically believed in, for example, Nestorian Christianity, Buddhism, Manichaeism, and Islam. So Uyghur people lived with different groups in peace until the Manchu Qing dynasty occupied East Turkestan in 1884.
Okay, 1884. So till the 19th century, there was no tension.
No tension. We're not part of China or part of Qing dynasty until 1884. Right. 1884, the Manchus occupied East Turkestan. Manchus also occupied China. So the Manchu dynasty was not a Chinese dynasty, in fact. And also, it was a colonial power, so we were incorporated into Manchu Qing dynasty.
So let's bring us up to date, because the question was, how do you live with the rest of your neighbors? And bring us up to date. How are you living with the rest of your neighbors?
We're living peacefully with, for example, we historically belong to, similar to like the Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, like the Kazakhs people who live in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan in Central Asia. We're the same people. Now they have their own independence and freedom. They have their own country. Historically, we're the same. The Russians came, expanded into Central Asia, conquered them. The Chinese came, expanded, and conquered us.
So Aleem, I want to bring us up to date, because the history lesson will take us beyond the time that we have for this show. So you say you're living well with your neighbors on one side, but Victor, the neighbors who are in the rest of China, please jump in. Go ahead, Victor.
Let me add one point. Aleem, I think you need to wake up.
I need to wake up
about any other country in the world, United Nations, any international organizations, no country in the world does not recognize Xinjiang as part of China.
It's today you are talking about. I explained the history, I think.
Predates the establishment of, the Chinese involvement
Can you explain what Xinjiang really means in your language?
To the Han Dynasty predates.
Yeah, can you explain what Xinjiang really literally means in the Chinese language?
Leem, hold tight for a moment because we do have a delay with Victor. Victor did listen to you. So Victor, let's just bring us up to date, Victor, because I don't want to get stuck on this historical
names keep
point.
changing across the ages.
All right, Victor, let's get up to date. Up to date. There's obviously
What you are
tension
advocating
here.
is independence of Xinjiang and establishment of the Eastern Turkmenistan. This is
not
illegal
Eastern
in China by
Turkmenistan,
definition
East
of law,
Turkestan.
and if you
Let me
advocate
correct
that, you will be considered as a criminal.
All right,
Yes.
gentlemen, hold
There
tight
is
for
no
a second.
East Turkmenistan
Your
in the whole
government
world.
considers all
Gentlemen.
Uyghurs as criminals today.
Victor,
The United States,
Aleem, hold tight
the
for a
United
second.
States
Victor,
of
give me
America
a
does
moment,
not recognize
please.
that.
Give me a moment, please. We have to recognize that we have an international community here who are trying to understand why there is tension between some Uyghurs and some Han Chinese. So let me just bring in Anne for a moment. Anne, you've been looking at what's going on online. If you could explain to us some of the stereotypes that circulate around the Uyghur community, can you tell us a few of those?
What I can speak to are some stereotypes that some Han Chinese have about Uyghurs. And first, to speak from my own experience, this was about 10 years ago when I was an exchange student. A friend told me that there were Uyghur students in the floor above her in the dorm that were very loud and were making a lot of noise at night, but she and her friends were afraid to confront them because, oh, you know, they carry knives around campus. And as someone who's American, it was really shocking to hear a kind of stereotype thrown around like that. And there is among many Han this feeling that Uyghurs are violent and somehow easily provoked. I looked at some Weibo posts that people have written in the past year, and you do find a lot of those stereotypes floating around, but you do also see Han Chinese who weren't against those stereotypes.
All right, so give us an example. Give us an example of a stereotype.
So this idea of people being violent and quick to anger.
Yeah.
There was a Weibo post from a few months ago. The user is Happy Zhangjiang, and he wrote this long post about different personal interactions he'd had with Uyghurs, and finding that a lot of them had been very kind to him and very honest. And then he also pointed out, there were riots in the capital of Xinjiang, Urumqi, in 2009, and then he wrote, and this is a quote from our translation: the terrorists who launched attacks in Xinjiang, Beijing, and Kunming are not the same as the Uyghur policemen and Uyghur heroes who fought the riot, who were trying to quell the riots. And he also mentioned that there were Uyghurs who were on a China Southern Airlines flight in 2009,
right,
who foiled a plot by other Uyghurs to hijack that flight. So he was making the point that they're not all the same people, and we can't just look at them according to these stereotypes.
Gotcha. Milika.
Well, in talking about those stereotypes, there's one thing that I am seeing online, Aleem, and this is the idea that there's a crackdown in Xinjiang, and there's violence there because of this. Kajika says the close proximity of Xinjiang to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, local quote-unquote Islamic troublemakers. And this person says they increase China's fears. What do you make of that, of the borders being porous?
Borders are not porous. Borders are tightly held, actually secured by the Chinese security forces. And plus, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all of those countries are China's close allies. Even if some Uyghurs escape China, goes to these countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization member countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan would be happy to deport all these Uyghurs back. They have in fact deported over the past 2 decades. Most of the Uyghurs who were deported from Pakistan, Nepal, Afghanistan, from Central Asian countries have been executed or sentenced to life. And even Uyghurs from Cambodia were deported in 2009 upon the arriving of Chinese current President Xi Jinping.
So Aleem,
they were also
I was just talking about a bombing just recently, or an attempted bombing just in the last few days. So there is still obviously some activity, some what would you call it? Violence. I mean, there's no other way to put it. How would you describe that? How would you frame that?
Last Monday, allegedly, the Chinese.
We don't have to go about specific instances, but
Right,
obviously
yeah.
there are still.
Yes.
It's still happening.
Yes, it is.
Why?
It is happening because the Chinese government had increased its heavy-handed repression, have been committing what we call cultural genocide against the Uyghur people. First, China is criminalizing the Islamic faith of the Uyghur people. Secondly, China is targeting the Uyghur traditions, Uyghur language, trying to make Uyghurs disappear. As Mr. Gao clearly said, Uyghurs, they try to belittle Uyghurs as just one of the 56 nationalities in China. Uyghurs are insignificant, they do not play a big role.
This
is a way they try to culturally assimilate.
Some people in the Uyghur community are trying to bomb other people because of
You
that.
are being distorting.
No, it is because in 2009 there was a massacre by the Chinese state.
All right, let me allow
against
Victor
the
in.
Uyghur people.
All right, let me allow Victor in. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah. No, first of all, Alim, you need to recognize China has the largest population in the world. Uyghurs are a very important part of the whole Chinese nation. There are altogether 56 ethnic groups in China, including the Uyghurs. The overwhelming majority of the Uyghur people are very, very important. They are very proud. They are a very important part of the whole Chinese nation. Now,
So Victor, we have this situation where there is violence and the Chinese authorities have to deal with this. We're running out of time very rapidly, and this would be a good point to address this.
Let me give you one point. Recently, one very important Uyghur, Nur Balik, has been appointed chairman of China's National Energy Agency, in charge of coal, oil, gas, nuclear, water, etc. This is a very, very important cabinet appointment.
I agree with that. I agree with this. The Chinese government appointed him precisely because he faithfully served the Chinese government's repressive measures against his own people. He oversaw the mass killing of the Uyghur people on July 5th of 2009.
All right, gentlemen, just everybody take a pause for a second, because otherwise I just hear Victor and Leem.
Let me mention one point.
Victor, give me a moment here. Everybody just give me a moment, because we have an international community and you are just arguing back and forth and they have no clue what you're talking about.
Right.
What is the point of you being here today? All right, so one at a time. Victor,
let me add one point.
No, you added your one point, and I'm going to ask you one question.
There is no
Victor, give me a moment. Victor, give me a moment, please.
There is no country in the world which recognizes the independence of Xinjiang.
I'm just going to take a pause for a moment.
That's the point.
Okay, that's your second point. All right, terrorism in this region. How the Chinese authorities are dealing with this is what? How would you characterize it?
Let me tell you one point. Yes. There
Another one point.
For the record, Uyghur terrorists who are fighting in Afghanistan against the US troops, against the NATO troops. Some of them have been captured. Some of them have been detained in Guantanamo. This is a fact. Now, Alim, if you are really caring for the Uyghur people, you need to denounce terrorism, both in China
we denounce terrorism. We are opposed to violence. You are just spinning the Chinese government's version of the Guantanamo saga. There were 22 Uyghurs who were arrested, sold out by the Pakistanis to the American forces, who were transferred to Guantanamo. All 22 of these Uyghurs were declared by the US government as non-enemy combatants, which means they are not terrorists, fearing that if they were extradited to China, Chinese government would be happy to execute them. So US government found different small countries and sent them to those countries, because the big Western powers cannot accept them, precisely because of the Chinese government's heavy-handed pressure. So all of these 22 Uyghurs, while you and your government claims as terrorists, the US government, the international community does not call them terrorists. Similarly, the people that you are repressing, you are killing, your security forces.
For the record,
yesterday in Guangxi province, they are not terrorists, because you do not allow like foreign media like Al Jazeera, like CNN, like anybody to come and report on the instance. You harass them, you kick out foreign journalists, including Al Jazeera journalist Melissa Chan. This is how you control the information, brainwash the people there. You try to spin your story in the international community.
We're interested to see what Victor has to say very briefly, and then I want to bring in the community and then also Anne. Briefly, Victor, please.
Let me add a point.
Go ahead.
Let me add a point, yes. While the overwhelming majority of the Uyghur people in China are peace-loving, It is true.
They are
and it is for
always
the record
peace-loving
that
until
there
your
have been
government
Leem, take a
started
breath.
murdering and
Leem.
killing the Uyghur people.
Leem, please.
fighting in Syria, fighting in Syria and fighting in Iraq.
That's
And
your
the
claim,
Uyghur
but
battalion
you
among
can't
ISIS
even present
is
substantive
becoming a
information
very,
on
very
that.
lethal
Your government is trying to
element of
spin the
ISIS.
Uyghur issue as
this
an
is a
international
very
terrorism
dangerous
issue
Gentlemen,
to
Leem,
justify
please.
your
Terrorist
heavy-handed
movement.
repression.
All right, I'm moving on, everybody. Victor, Aleem, I'm moving on for a moment.
Sure.
Malika.
In the heat of the discussion, what people online are saying is what's gotten lost is what life is actually like for the Uyghur people on the ground. And that's represented in these two tweets, Aleem. Abisha says the government is unnecessarily adding oppression of religion among the problems that people are already facing. And so it's one example of that. Nurlan tweets this. This is an image that's been circulating online. This is, she writes, the Chinese authorities ban on Uyghur Muslims populace. And it's a ban that's circulated in buses and other transport vehicles, a ban on burqa, a ban on beards, other symbols, cultural symbols of Muslims. You have family still there. What is their daily life like? What do they face?
In East Turkestan, not just East Turkestan, all over China, being a Uyghur is being, if not seen or treated as a criminal by the Chinese government, and the Chinese propaganda makes the Chinese people feel like Uyghurs are criminals, just like Anna earlier explained, the kind of stereotypes, even in colleges for university studying Uyghurs. And the Uyghurs Muslim, they of course dress like Muslim. The women have long dresses, which is now banned by the Chinese government. Next to France, only China has banned the veiling of Muslims in East Turkestan. And Uyghur men, they cannot grow beard. Compared to the Han Chinese, the Uyghurs are bushy people. Uyghur have beards as young as like 17, 18. But if you are a Uyghur, you have a beard. The government, the police can harass you. If you argue with them, they can detain you. If you fight with them, they can kill you as a terrorist. This is the daily life of the Uyghur people. For Uyghurs, Muslims, they have to pray 5 times a day. They cannot go to hospital if they're sick, pray in a hospital. Only retired, not even retired people. So women are not allowed to pray. Minors are not allowed to pray. When, for example, one Uyghur 70-year-old man from Rimchi took the bus to Hotan, which is like a 2-day journey. And as a pious Muslim, he tried to pray on the bus. The Han Chinese driver bit the hell out of the Uyghur man and turned him into a Chinese
So,
police.
take a pause
This
because
is the
I
way.
want to share with you a statement from the Foreign Ministry, and just here on my laptop it says, the Chinese government protects citizens' freedom of religious belief in accordance with law. Religious believers from all ethnic groups of China are fully entitled to conducting normal religious activities according to law. We are opposed to linking terrorism with any specific ethnic group or religion. And what you said is in direct contrast to this statement here.
Yes.
So I know that we are not finished with this
let me add a point
conversation.
here, yes.
Victor Gao, I love your points. We're going to take all of your points to the post show because I don't want to squeeze you for time. I have 1 minute left. And I heard you about 6 minutes ago. What did you want to add to this conversation before we take you all to the post show?
Just one final point about where the spectrum of Uyghurs are.
Sure. Just briefly, Anne.
Some people,
a sentence.
yeah, so,
go ahead.
Sure. That there is this issue of repression going on and people not being able to express themselves religiously, and that this has caused a lot of tension between Uyghurs and Han Chinese in Xinjiang province, and that there's also discriminatory policies in terms of education and applying for jobs.
And we'll get examples of those in
has,
just a moment, because I know you've been monitoring online and Weibo, which is China's version of Twitter. So Anne Henokowitz, we will hear more from her, Victor Gao, and also Aleem Satouf. If you've been a little bit confused by this conversation, I'm going to try and unpack it just a little bit more. So bear with us and come to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. It is passionate, I know it'll be lively, no doubt loud, but we'll also do some unpacking as well. On the next show, capitalism and its impact on society. It's now the time to rethink how Western economies work. It's a huge topic for the next AJ stream. See you soon. This is the Streams online post show. We've been discussing the reasons behind the ongoing violence in China's Xinjiang province. We've been trying to discuss the reasons behind the ongoing violence, and you brought up a couple of different things right at the end of the show. Love to hear examples, recap, and then give us an example.
Yeah, so over the past 2 years, we have seen restrictions on traditional Muslim dress, for instance, in Xinjiang province. So that image that you showed before is from a city called Karamai, which last summer banned certain articles of clothing, such as a hijab and the burqa, as well as long beards, from anyone who wants to ride a public bus. And this came to the attention of China Digital Times because there was a propaganda directive that was leaked where news websites were instructed to play down this story. So on the one hand, this edict was being issued in Karamai, but the authorities didn't want the news to spread too far.
Right, okay, so let me just bring back in Victor here. Victor, I really want people to understand what's going on here, particularly as we don't have Chinese authorities in the conversation, but I know you do understand the thinking behind what's happening in the Xinjiang province from the authorities' point of view. And I don't want it to just be an animosity. I really want to understand this better. So the reaction to the violence in this province, can you help us understand where the Chinese government is coming from?
Yeah, first of all, terrorism in Xinjiang is on the rise, together with fundamentalism and separatism. There are people among the Uyghur minority which advocate independence of Xinjiang. In China, this is completely illegal. It is not to be tolerated. No country, no international organization will ever recognize the independence of Xinjiang. Therefore, if people like Alim advocate independence of Xinjiang, it will be a futile struggle. Now,
Thank you for your preaching.
China is a
I'm
great
sorry,
friend
can I just
of the
jump in
Muslim
because
world,
there's an
of the
important
Arab
point you
world.
didn't make during the show.
And
now, people like you, I think,
let me
Mr.
finish.
Gao, you
Alim,
represent
I was
Chinese
very
government
kind to listen to
institution,
you.
not some
Let me
private
finish my point.
independent.
All right, guess.
And
let me
please do
finish my
not
point.
preach to me.
All right,
You
guess.
If you have
need to
a
be fair.
point,
Let
you
me
stick to
finish
your
my
point.
All right, guess.
Yeah.
We spent the first part of the show, a valuable part of the show, yelling at each other. It was not helpful for me.
You should
Ali,
stop
So we need
please take
the
a
whole
pause.
world need
Victor,
to
finish
be,
your
let
sentence.
Me add one point.
Finish your
Make
sentence.
your point, not
World
preach.
need to be united against terrorism, fundamentalism, and separatism.
We're also
Therefore,
united
Alim,
against
you need to
Chinese
stand
state
out
terrorism.
and condemn
All right,
terrorism.
Alim, would you like
That's
the world
what
to
you
know
need
about
to
the
do.
Uyghur community?
Yes.
All right,
You need to condemn
Victor.
terrorism in Afghanistan as well as terrorism in the
All right, Victor, this is exasperating for
That's
me
what
because
you
I
need to
asked
do.
you something very specific. I'm trying to get the international community to understand the Chinese authorities' reaction to the terrorism in Xinjiang. Can you actually help us understand why men would be told that they can't have beards, why women would be told that they can't wear hijab or the burqa? That would be helpful to understand that. Please.
Yeah, for the benefit of the global audience, I would say that terrorism in Xinjiang is on the rise.
You've already
And the
said
whole
that,
nation in
Victor.
China
Please
needs to
let's
be
not repeat
united
over and
against
over
terrorism
again.
Answer the
and
question.
The
fundamentalism
reason.
and extremism.
All right, Victor, I'm
And
giving up.
in
Moving on.
dealing with
Anne,
terrorism,
please come in.
we cannot be complacent.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Yeah.
Please, Anne, go ahead.
the reason that I would see for these kinds of restrictions have to do with religious policy in China generally. That China does control religions. They're officially controlled, such as Islam, and that it's trying to sort of promote a secularism, and I think also keep religious groups under state control. There have been times in the recent past, a lot of viewers will remember the rise of Falun Gong in I think 1999, 2000, and the Chinese state cracked down on that because there's this fear of political instability that comes from religious unrest. The other point I wanted to make is that this isn't just about two extremes of either holding up Chinese sovereignty or wanting to be separate. There is a Uyghur activist and scholar, Ilham Tohti, who about a month ago was sentenced to life in prison for separatism. He never advocated for the independence of East Turkestan. He was a moderate, but he was persecuted and now is spending the rest of his life in jail because he ran a website called Uyghur Online, because he advocated for the civil rights of Uyghurs under Chinese law. And many of his students, about 7 of them, have also been in prison now for 3 to 8 years for their participation in his website.
Okay, Malika.
Well, it's because of what Anne just mentioned, that people that are seen as moderates are being imprisoned, that we're not actually going to get anywhere, and that's a viewpoint that I'm seeing online. So Malik on Twitter says, Beijing must learn that sitting down and perhaps working things out diplomatically should not be seen as a loss or weakening of power. And Anne, this next post is from Weibo, and it's actually from your website, and you referenced this person who wrote this a little bit earlier, Happy Zhongzhang, and this is the part that I wanted to pick up on, though. He writes, how do we unite the forces that can be united, and how do we clean up more than a handful of terrorists? He writes, simply treating all Uyghurs harshly won't solve that problem, and instead it will push them to the side of the quote-unquote terrorists. So Anne, I'm wondering if this is one lone poster, or if this is an idea that you see often in Mandarin Cantonese online spheres.
I have seen other Weibo users post similar calls for tolerance, and that there are moderate voices who are making a distinction between terrorists, between people who are truly violent, and between people who are simply beleaguered. And that while there are these stereotypes perpetuated online, there are also people out there who believe that allowing Uyghurs and Han to be truly equal and to mingle more, to work together, to go to school together, is going to help heal all of these wounds.
All right, I'm going to tell Aleem and Victor the same thing. Aleem, I'm going to come to you, but Victor, I'm going to start with you. And if you could just respect each other's space, so I can actually hear a very clear response. Victor, I will ask you to not repeat. No. I have one thing to ask you, and I'm going to ask you if you could honor that. And that is, there's a phrase called that comes with this whole debate, which is ethnic tension for the Xinjiang region. What is that ethnic tension? Can you describe it from your perspective?
The ethnic tension in Xinjiang is a direct result of the terrorist attacks committed by some very few Uyghur extremists or terrorists in Xinjiang. And the tendency is not only restricted to Xinjiang now. Terrorist attacks are on the rise in other major cities. In China, recently we had terrorist attacks in Beijing, in Kunming, in many other major cities. And these terrorist attacks are indiscriminate. They are aimed at killing people, innocent people, in public places. As a result, I think the government has no other choice but to beef up security and deal with the rising terrorism as we speak. Now, if you look at France, for example, or many other European cities, even in America, no government authorities can let down guard against the rising terrorism. The mankind need to get united against terrorism. This is the main crux of the matter we are faced with. Now, in China, we have the largest mobile users, we have the largest number of internet users. Therefore, people express themselves almost freely on internet. You cannot just pick and choose some of the opinions expressed by individuals to represent the majority people in China. That's unfair.
All right, thank you, Victor. Let me ask that same question to Aleem. This idea of ethnic tension, Victor just gave us his perspective, your perspective. It sums up a lot of things for you. How do you unpack that?
Ethnic tension, the so-called ethnic tension between the Han majority and the so-called Uyghur minority, is a direct result of Chinese government's systematic repressive policies imposed upon the Uyghur people. The current government, the People's Republic of China, that was created in 1949, was established by Mao Zedong. But before the Chinese Communist Party created what is now today's China, it promised the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongols, so-called minorities, self-determination. They can either remain part of China or secede, become independent states. But after China was able to conquer these territories, secure the borders, so they tried to fool the people with so-called autonomous region. So Legally, Xinjiang now is a Uyghur autonomous region, just like Tibet is Tibetan region. But Chinese promises, communist promises, are all lies. Just like China's promise to Hong Kong, one country, two system, it turned out to be a lie. It did not honor its laws.
So do you think the Uyghur community is upset about this history that goes back
first of
many
all,
decades?
yes. First of all, Uyghurs do not feel they belong to China. Secondly, China occupied, conquered,
for all the
and
Uyghur community here?
Yes, and Uyghurs feel they are being conquered, occupied, and colonized by the current Chinese government. Plus, the majority of the Han Chinese population who are now in East Turkestan came after 1949.
Does East Turkestan exist other than in a Uyghur
East Turkestan was a republic
thinking?
from 1944 to 1949
but
until
no longer
Soviet
exists.
Union supported China's Mao Zedong to crush the independent
But
republic.
it doesn't exist today.
Not anymore. After 49, China
just being clear for our
destroyed
international
that.
community, we have
As a result,
to use,
yes.
we have to use geography that exists today.
Of course. As a result, China systematically transferred millions of Chinese people. The Chinese people in East Turkestan now nearly half of the population.
So you're basically saying, let's just cut to the chase here.
Yes.
The Uyghur community, and you're speaking for all the Uyghur community, do not want to be part of China.
If in China, and Mr. Gao is happy to explain that everybody has freedom of speech online, that's not the fact. China has the biggest internet control machine, and the police are everywhere to check, especially in East Turkestan. But if there is a possibility to do any kind of survey or even a referendum, after the massacre of 2009 by the Chinese security forces, most Uyghurs, even probably Mr. Gao's friends, don't want to be part of China, even though they may tell him that they'd be happy to be under Chinese rule out of fear and government reprisal. As Anne earlier explained, even the most moderate Uyghur scholar Ilham Tohti, who was not a separatist, who was a loyal Chinese citizen, who only complained about Chinese government's certain language and cultural religious policies, who wants to become a bridge between the Han Chinese people and the Uyghur people, he was sentenced to life as a separatist by this government that treats everybody equally in their propaganda, but not in reality.
All right, so now finally, we have a really good sense of where this tension actually is. Victor, hold tight for 1 second. I hear that the Chinese authorities, and Victor's giving us that sense there from the Chinese authorities, are upset about terrorism. I hear that the Uyghurs want to just be a community by themselves, do not want to be Chinese. Victor, what do you think is going to happen next?
Listen, if Alim cares for the well-being of the Uyghur,
please do not preach to me, just to make your point, please.
Then we do not have a difference. I also care for the Uyghur people. I'm actually, among many other things I do, I'm a guest professor at the Xinjiang University of Finance. I go to Urumqi to speak to my students, to talk to faculty, and to give lectures at the Xinjiang University of Finance. I have many Uyghur friends in Xinjiang, together with other minorities, as I mentioned, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, etc. Yeah. Therefore, on the other hand, if Alim is advocating independence of Xinjiang, then he will get nowhere. No country will support it. The United States government will not support it. European countries will not support it.
This is not an issue of independence or not independence. This is an issue of China's communist, atheist, colonial rule and heavy-handed repressive policies. Mr. Gao, I read your bio. You are the translator for Deng Xiaoping. And in DengXiaoping's years, his policies were rather lenient. That's why you didn't see much violence. But today, because of your government's heavy-handed repression.
I guess this is a good point to end the conversation, because as you're both speaking, neither of you are listening, and I do want to get the community a last word in here. Malika.
This is the last word that I'm going to share from Twitter. Kadzika writes in, the only thing that grows in China faster than social and ethnic tensions, which of course you've heard about on today's show, is the control of public security. And I think that speaks to the idea that it needs to be controlled, and on the other side, that the crackdown and that control of public security is the problem.
Victor Gao, Leem Satouf, and Anne Henna-Kovitz. This show is not big enough for your passion and for your debating, but I appreciate you bringing that passion and debating skills here to the stream. I'm going to go for lie down right now, but if not before I tell you about the next show. It's a big topic, capitalism and its impact on society. Is now the time to rethink how Western economies work? I may need your help with that debate, but I need your help in 24 hours' time. See you soon.